Very little is known about Albert Wesker's past other than that he was born with genes which granted him enhanced intelligence. As an infant, Albert would be placed into the Wesker program, a program created by the CEO of Umbrella, Oswald E. Spencer, to create the perfect breed of humans. Eventually being offered a job at Umbrella and would form a friendly rivalry with Dr. William Birkin and would go on to help him develop the T-virus. After this, Wesker would be used as a spy for Umbrella, infiltrating several organizations including the US military, before being assigned to lead STARS, a police team similar to a SWAT unit but with funding backed by Umbrella, making its members an unaware strike team for the company. Under orders from Umbrella, Wesker would lead STARS to the Arclay Mansion facility where most members would be slaughtered: Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, Rebecca Chambers, and Brad Vickers. During this event, Wesker would inject himself with a prototype virus given to him by William Birkin before being killed by a BOW known as the Tyrant. However, the virus would resurrect Albert as well as enhancing his physical abilities to superhuman levels. He would then set the facility to explode before fighting his way through the infected mansion and would escape just before it would explode. Disappearing for several years, Wesker would then disappear for several years before reappearing on Rockford Island, where he would confronting Chris and his sister Claire before obtaining a sample of the T. Veronica virus from the body of Steve Burnside, and would lay low, only reappearing to finish off Umbrella, unknowingly aiding Chris and Jill. Disappearing once again, he would now use field agents and mercenaries to gather various virus samples, including the Las Plagas parasite, and using them would engineer the Ouroboros virus, granting him even more power than he had before. He would then track down Spencer and would assassinate him just before Chris and Jill would appear, having also tracked Spencer down. A fight would break out and Wesker would almost kill Chris, but Jill would intervene, tackling him out of a window. The two would then survive and Jill would be captured and controlled by Wesker, who would use her as his personal assassin. Now taking his operations to Africa, Wesker would prepare to unleash Ouroboros onto the world to purify the human race. However, Chris and fellow BSAA agent Sheva Alomar would intervene and after several encounters would ultimately kill Wesker. Very little is known about Cole's life before the events of Empire City. After dropping out of college, mainly to piss off his parents, he'd get a job as a bike messenger, and one day while delivering a package, he'd get a call from a man named Kessler, offering him money to open up the package. Opening it and finding a strange device that would go off, destroying everything in a 6-block radius, and leaving Cole in a coma. When he awoke a couple of weeks later, he would discover that he had gained the ability to channel electricity and would use his new powers to battle the gangs of Empire City, but along the way would meet Kessler, who seemed to be behind everything and did everything he could to push Cole from convincing his best friend Zeke to join him for a chance of power, to forcing Cole to choose between saving a group of doctors or his girlfriend Trish. Cole would try to heal Trish, but would ultimately only have a few moments with her, and she would tell Cole that she was proud of him for using his powers to help others. After this, Cole would be contacted by Kessler, who would meet him at the same spot the ray sphere had gone off, and the two would fight, with Cole finally defeating Kessler. However, the man wasn't dead yet, and using the last of his energy would show Cole a vision of the future, revealing that Kessler was in fact a version of Cole from said future, who had traveled back in time after his family had been killed by a powerful conduit known as the Beast, and had come back to mold Cole into the man he couldn't be. With Kessler finally dead and now knowing what was at stake, Cole would vow to destroy the Beast, and months later would be contacted by the NSA agent Lucy Quo, who was aware of both the Beast and Kessler and wanted to help by introducing Cole to Dr. Sebastian Wolf, who had actually worked with Kessler. Right as Cole, Zeke, and Lucy were leaving for Empire City, the Beast would appear, and while Cole did everything he could to defeat it, he would fail and Empire City would be destroyed. Now more determined than ever to defeat the Beast, Cole would go to the city of New Marais, where he would meet Dr. Wolf, who would tell him about a device called the RFI, which Cole was told would drain the Beast's powers. However, Cole would end up facing several setbacks, having to deal with a militia, a group of ice conduits, monsters, and the death of Dr. Wolf, as well as a plague that was quickly spreading throughout the city, killing many people. Eventually, thanks to his old and new allies, Cole was able to get the RFI ready, but not before the Beast found its way to New Marais. However, revealing itself to be an old ally of Cole's, John White, who planned to save humanity from the plague by turning as many humans into conduits, who, as it turned out, were immune from the plague. However, there was another way. Using the RFI, Cole could also cure the plague, however at the cost of his own life as well as the lives of all conduits on Earth. Deciding that the needs of the many outweighed his and the lives of other conduits, Cole would decide to use the RFI, battling John and studying him long enough to activate the device, killing himself and the other conduits on Earth. Now seen as a saint by the people of New Marais, Cole's body would be taken to be buried alone by his brother Zeke. Hello and welcome everyone to the 11th episode of my second season of my Versus series, where I'll be putting the main antagonist of the Resident Evil series, Albert Wesker, up against the protagonist of the first two Infamous games, Cole MacGrath, to see who I think would win if they ever went head to head. Now, this fight was a request, but my original list for this season got erased, and now I don't actually know who requested this fight. So I guess if you're the one that requested this, go ahead and say so in the comments and I can give you credit there, but right now I don't know who to thank for the idea. Back to the match. For Wesker, I'll be using him once again from Resident Evil 5, and as none of the information on him has changed, I will be using a revamped version of my original script to cover him. And for Cole, I'll be using his Infamous 2 variation, only using information given from the games, not the tie-in comic. Right, with all that out of the way, let's start by comparing them physically. At the time of his death, Albert Wesker was a 49-year-old infected human standing at 6 foot 3 inches tall and weighed 198 pounds. Despite being a deadly combatant, Wesker rarely puts himself in a position where he needs to be in combat, preferring to play a commanding role from the shadows, and thanks to the Ouroboros virus in his body, has exceeded the limits of the human body and has obtained superhuman status. Wesker is incredibly strong, able to send people flying from a single strike or even punch right through them with little effort. He was capable of picking up missiles and throwing them with a single hand, could go right through metal even after being weakened twice, and finally, even in his weakened state, was still far more powerful than Chris, who, as I explained in my Captain America vs. Krauser video, even while lowballed, should be capable of moving 30,000 pounds. Enhanced strength is far from his only power, as he has also gained increased speed to the point where he can dodge bullets fired at point blank range or clear long distances in a matter of seconds. He could get from one side of the room to the next before Chris, a trained soldier, had time to lift his knife, and multiple times in Resident Evil 5 dodges gunfire coming from two directions at the same time, and again, even in a heavily weakened state, was still capable of dodging bullets. Stamina is a little hard to determine, as he hasn't been shown to tire at any point in the series, but it can be assumed that just like his other physical abilities, this was enhanced to be at superhuman levels. Like all other physical aspects, Wesker's durability has been enhanced to superhuman levels, being able to shrug off steel beams being dropped on him, and can even take an RPG to the face and get back up more pissed off than hurt. It should also be noted that he has a healing factor that will repair damage done to his body over time, and that his skin and skeleton have been hardened to the point that he can stop a knife with little damage and even shrug off bullets to the face from high caliber weapons. At the time of his death, Cole was a 27-year-old conduit standing at 6 feet even and weighing 180 pounds. Even before awakening to his conduit abilities, Cole was in excellent physical shape, having taken part in urban exploration and parkour for fun. After the blast and awakening to his powers, his physical abilities were all enhanced, putting him well above human limits in these areas. However, as the focus of these games are more on the powers, Cole's physical abilities don't receive many examples of his strength, but we do get enough, such as when he dented a metal locker, easily lifted metal debris over his head, and even held open a devourer's mouth, to show that his strength at least was greatly increased. His speed was similarly enhanced, easily having a faster running speed compared to normal humans, can react to and counter other conduits in combat, and was fast enough to react to and then redirect rockets. He could continue fighting for a period of at least 12 hours, as he would operate in the Empire City and New Moraes from the time he woke up to when he went to sleep. Cole was also made incredibly durable, being able to shrug off machine gun fire and even high caliber weapons for a short time, can survive being in close range to a mortar round and direct hits from several rocket launchers, as well as taking hits from titans like Devourers, Ice Titans, and even survived his fights with the Beast. Both Cole and Wesker have enhanced abilities to the point where some of their stats actually even out, but even then it's clear to see that one has the overall edge thanks to their abilities. Strength was actually a bit more complicated. Cole, while not having many examples of strength due to the nature of the games, is still very impressive, holding off the Devourer and denting metal. However, at most, this would make Cole even with a weakened Wesker, not Wesker at his full strength. Now, to be fair, if Cole was fighting a Wesker he was naturally equal to, it would be a pretty big deal, but Cole would lack the knowledge to make this a reality, so strength still goes to Wesker. Speed is the biggest as well as easiest area to determine. Wesker, again, even in a weakened state, can dodge bullets and move faster than people can see. Meanwhile, Cole's best showing of this ability was reacting to RPG rounds, a difference I already went over in Batman vs. Wesker, but to state it once more, there's a difference of about 800 feet a second between these two in Wesker's favor. I don't feel that stamina would be a factor in this fight. Not only do we not see their absolute limits, but even if we assume that, say, Cole could only fight for a day and Wesker could fight for longer, I don't feel that this would be a fight that drags on that long. The closest category for this department is durability, as both Cole and Wesker can tank bullets like they're nothing, can walk off point-blank explosions from RPGs, and both possess a healing factor allowing them to regenerate what damage has been done to them over time. However, I actually think that Cole is more resilient overall due to his first encounter with the Beast, where after being defeated and nearly killed, was dropped in water and left for dead, until Zeke and Lucy rescued him. With the Beast already being powerful enough to erase cities, and large bodies of water already damaging him heavily, normally killing him outright. However, while a good edge to have, durability alone isn't going to give Cole this category. Sure, he may be hitting in the same ballpark in that one category, but Wesker still keeps comfortably ahead of Cole to the point where Wesker wouldn't need to take Cole too seriously in a purely physical sense, even if he can take more damage. And while Cole is hitting hard enough to hurt Wesker, Wesker's hitting much harder, which should more than compensate for Cole's higher durability. And it is for these reasons that I give Wesker the edge in physical abilities. Wesker will be bringing two weapons into this engagement. A Lightning Hawk Magnum, which seems to me to be based off of a Desert Eagle, which fires 50 caliber bullets and has a clip size of 7 to 9 bullets, and a muzzle velocity of 1500 feet a second, and his custom Beretta 92F dubbed the Samurai Edge, which fires 9mm bullets and has a clip size of 15 bullets and a muzzle velocity of 1200 feet a second. Cole, however, will only be bringing a single weapon into this fight, that being his custom weapon created by Zeke dubbed the Amp. The Amp was a 3-foot long weapon similar in design to a cattle prod, but was made to be wielded like a baton or bat. This weapon was made specifically by use for Cole, and as such lets him channel thousands of volts of electricity through it with every swing. I feel this is pretty simple. Wesker would without a doubt hold the range advantage with weapons, but if I'm being honest, that's the only thing going for Wesker here. The Amp not only gives Cole more reach in a close fight, but is easier to defend with and will deal more damage. Now, I'll be getting more into this a little later, but there's really nothing to suggest that Wesker is resistant to electricity, like he and Cole are to bullets. Funnily enough, however, neither of these two will want to play to the advantage of their weapons, as Wesker simply prefers close quarters combat, and Cole's primary style being dependent on range because of his powers, with the Amp as one of many options. Overall, while Cole's weapon isn't as fast or have as much range, however, considering the opponent these weapons will be used against, Cole's Amp is much more suited for combat against Wesker than Wesker's guns are against Cole. And so, I give Cole the edge in weapons and equipment. Okay, as a brief aside before getting into special abilities, Wesker's enhancements all take the form of an increase in physical abilities. So to save on time, I'm not going to be repeating his physical stats, but I will compare them to Cole's powers after discussing them. With his conduit abilities being activated by the Ray Sphere, Cole MacGrath was awakened to his powers, primarily electrokinesis, electromagnetism, and as a consequence of using the power transfer device with Lucy Crow, cryokinesis. His electro and cryokinesis lets him fire several types of projectiles, with both powers letting him fire missiles and throw grenades, letting him freeze and shock his opponents. Starting off with the exclusive abilities with his original power of electrokinesis, Cole's main offensive power lets him shoot bolts of lightning from his hands as a projectile. He could fire a shockwave that throws his targets into the air. By charging up a specific part of his brain, Cole's perception of time would be slowed, letting him hit targets that would normally be too fast for him to get a clear shot at. And not just limited to offense, Cole could also use his abilities for mobility. His static thrusters allowed him to hover into the air. He could heal himself by draining electricity from an object or person, restrain, heal, or even drain a person of their bioelectric energy, instantly killing them, and finally could make a tether to bring himself to a further location or pull his opponents to himself. Electromagnetism gave him the ability to lift and throw metallic objects as projectiles, infusing them with electricity, giving them more force to hit with or causing them to explode. With cryokinesis, Cole can fire a series of ice spikes to impale opponents, or summon pillars to propel himself into the air, or even create a frost shield to protect him from projectiles, or even convert kinetic energy to electricity for Cole to fire back at his opponents. His final and most powerful abilities were that of his ionic abilities. His ionic abilities from his electrokinesis was calling down a powerful lightning storm to strike down at his opponents. Electromagnetism let him create a tornado to suck up and throw his opponents into the air while shocking them. And finally, his ionic freeze let him completely freeze a large group of opponents, dealing with them all non-lethally. Okay, so this should be an open and shut case, right? Wesker's max speed is comparable to bullets, whereas lightning travels at relativistic or even on the low end hypersonic speeds. So how could Wesker do anything? Well, that's simple. He doesn't need to dodge the lightning, he just needs to be able to react to Cole. So yes, it's true that Wesker has no chance in hell of giving out of the way of a lightning strike. He does have the ability to keep up with and move around Cole himself. So that being said, what I'm looking for in this category are counters to Wesker's speed. Spoiler warning, Cole has quite a few. His most obvious counter are his ice abilities, which have been shown to be capable of completely freezing someone. The next option would be a well-timed shockwave. A peak human like Chris was able to time a punch to Wesker, and Cole scales above Chris on top of just having better feats, so I don't think it's a stretch to say that Cole could pull off something similar. Cole is also uniquely mobile in a way that Wesker has never faced, having options for aerial superiority, a tether to elevate or drag himself to a more viable position, or even set Wesker up for giving him in a position to deal out a good amount of punishment. Unfortunately for Wesker, Cole's most powerful abilities would be the hardest for Wesker to avoid, with the Ionic Storm being outright impossible. To explain this, a natural lightning strike isn't actually possible to dodge for the simple fact that lightning moves at a third of the speed of light. And I'm just not gonna waste time explaining that Wesker isn't that fast because it should be obvious. And finally, Wesker would have no way to resist Cole's electricity like he would a bullet. Now, I don't think I need to explain this per se, but I will anyway, just in case someone doesn't know how electricity works. Simply put, it's going to deliver shocks to his muscles and nerves, as well as burn them, which simply works differently on a physiological level, meaning that while he may not be showing as much external damage, the amount of internal damage Wesker is taking will be exactly the same. However, this doesn't mean that it's just going to be a walk in the park for Cole. As I brought up in the physical department, Wesker is roughly 4 times faster than Cole. And while you might argue that Cole's ability to slow his perception of time would be the perfect counter, I actually believe this as well, until I tested it for myself, and unfortunately for Cole, the bullets were still too fast to dodge even with this mode enabled. However, Cole still has a much better reaction time than your average human, so I'll argue that this will still aid him, but it isn't a death sentence for Wesker. However, Cole still has multiple options for dealing with Wesker's speed advantage, to the point where simply adapting to or trying to predict how Cole is going to do so is going to be incredibly difficult, even for a highly intelligent fighter like Wesker. And it is for these reasons that I give Cole the edge in special abilities. Like in all of my matchups, when it comes to fighters who use bladed or melee weapons, I will be using Star Wars lightsaber fighting forms to better and more easily describe how one or both of these fighters approach combat with their particular styles. Now, with that out of the way, let's begin. As a former soldier in the US military, it can be assumed that Wesker has received standard military training which would give him knowledge in Taekwondo, a mainly kick-oriented martial art with an emphasis on mobility and speed to pressure an opponents with fast, mobile, high-power attacks, which Wesker will be able to perform with immense speed and power thanks to his altered physiology. Muay Thai is a fighting style similar to kickboxing, but teaching the use of elbow and knee blows rather than just the hands and feet, effectively allowing the user to implement their full body as a weapon. And Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, martial art that teaches grapples and holds to force an opponent to submit. However, it's more likely that if Wesker were to get someone in a hold like this, he'd simply crush the person in his grasp. As I have stated before, Wesker mainly works from the shadows as more of a commander. This being said, he is still a deadly fighter, and underestimating him is a mistake you won't get to make twice. Taking a cold and calculating approach to combat, never showing any emotion during a fight, and tactically, Wesker is rather straightforward, simply using his enhanced abilities to overpower or outmaneuver his enemies. However, Wesker did suffer an intense weakness when it came to his overconfidence and cocky nature due to his enhanced physical abilities, giving him something of a god complex, leading to him constantly underestimating his opponents, which ultimately resulted in his canonic death. Before the events of Infamous 1, Cole had little to no combat experience. However, throughout the events of both games, developed his own unique combat style as he battled the various gangs of Empire City and New Marais. As a melee fighter, Cole could best be described as a brawler, using heavy power-based strikes to beat down his opponent with a combat style that I would compare to a novice use of Form 4 variation Gem So. As while he has the basics of heavy hitting down, the more complex uses like counterattacking, deflection, and footwork aren't things he's demonstrated. And now, while I believe these are things Cole could be capable of improving on given time, or if there was a need to improve during his lifetime, he'd be better, but by the time of his canon death, this had not happened. However, his ranged combat style is much more tactical, as his wide range of abilities allows for far more experimentation against enemies. Cole's typical approach against enemies was to start off by progressively throwing his abilities until finding a weakness that he could exploit and spamming it. Or if there was no obvious weakness, throwing down with his most powerful abilities until his target was taken out. His skill set also allowed him to more easily get into advantageous positions in combat, such as elevated positions or more dense cover, allowing him to switch up from a defensive position to an offensive position whenever he pleased, allowing him to control the pace of a fight. This is an interesting one, as these two fighters focus on different ranges for combat, with Wesker preferring close range hand-to-hand combat and Cole's power set being geared for long range engagements. In terms of melee combat, Cole is simply outclassed, not only lacking any sort of formal training, but simply being too inexperienced due to how little time he had to improve his skills with the amp. During Infamous 2, as melee engagements would be rare for Cole, with most encounters being decided with his ranged abilities. Meanwhile, Wesker not only excels being trained as a soldier on top of his own personal improvement of his hand-to-hand skills, but has been fighting for much longer than Cole, giving him the experience edge as well. And to simplify things on the range side, it's the same story but in Cole's favor, as he would have absolute control in ranged combat with his abilities. So who would come out on top is dependent on tactics, and what they'd be able to do with them. And when it comes to this particular matchup, Cole is more equipped to take down Wesker than Wesker would ever be to take down Cole. Not only has Cole taken on enemies that outmatch him physically, but Wesker only has one viable method of attack, and that's with close range combat, as his guns don't pack nearly enough of a punch to out-tax Cole's healing factor, and even worse, they could never hope to compete with Cole's ranged powers. And as I described in the last category, Cole's powers are more than capable of dealing with Wesker than the other way around. And so, I give Cole the decisive edge in combat skills and tactics. Let's set up this fight. Let's say that it takes place in New Moray and that Wesker has tracked Cole down in pursuit of obtaining a sample of his DNA in hopes of implementing the conduit gene into Ouroboros. Wesker stalked through the street, attracting stares and looks of horror as he all but paraded the severed head of Joseph's betrayant, and just as planned, the person he had sought out and the sole reason he had come to this backwater city dropped down in front of him. Cole stared in disbelief as Wesker tossed Betrayant's head to the side at his arrival. As Wesker examines Cole, the conduit breaks the silence, asking Wesker who he is and what he was doing. Wesker, not caring to waste any time to occupy his target, goes for his samurai edge, fires off a few shots into Cole's chest. However, this doesn't even slow him down as Cole reacts, firing a bolt at Wesker's arm, setting off the gunpowder in the pistol, making it explode in Wesker's hand. Recoiling in pain, Wesker growls, but it turns into a laugh as he takes off his coat and puts away his glasses. Such magnificent abilities. Don't worry, I'll put them to good use. Cole, seeing that Wesker still intends to fight, doesn't waste any time responding and fires another bolt at Wesker, striking him in the chest. Wesker is hit again, but as soon as he can, he moves out of Cole's line of sight and, running at full speed, strikes his target across the jaw. Cole is thrown into a wall and, in response, fires a rocket at Wesker. However, it's just slow enough for Wesker to dodge as he again strikes at Cole, breaking his ribs and delivering a powerful strike to his jaw, stunning the conduit before lifting him into the air with one arm. Wesker, unable to help himself, would take just a moment to gloat at his opponent, believing he had beaten Cole before the fight had truly started. However, in that short moment, Cole would be able to recover and grabs onto Wesker's arms, sending thousands of volts into his arm, severely burning it within a couple of seconds. And now unable to keep his grip, Wesker drops Cole, who immediately pulls out the amp and begins striking Wesker over and over again. However, the blows themselves aren't doing that much damage, and Wesker using his good arm blocks another strike from the amp. Seeing that Wesker's arm is already repairing himself and that the man has gone from injured to pissed off, Cole surges the amp with electricity again, shocking Wesker before sending him flying with a shockwave. Having seen firsthand that the amp itself hardly even hurt Wesker, he puts it away and decides to focus on putting as much space between himself and his opponent as possible, running into an alley. As soon as Wesker is on his feet, he moves in, following Cole. However, now in a narrow passage, he has no room to move when Cole throws a grenade his way, being forced to rush Cole, and he's once again hit by a shockwave, now being thrown into the grenade. Now, more than sick of Cole throwing him around, Wesker looks for a distraction and finds it, flinging a dumpster his way, forcing Cole to roll under it, However, before he can get back up, Wesker slams into him like a train, putting Cole through a wall. Wesker smirks as he steps into the building, seeing Cole wipe blood from his mouth and looks up before stretching out his arm. However, Wesker moves to the side before Cole gets his shot off, and that gives him an idea. Cole twists his body around to fire at Wesker again, but at the last second, Wesker moves to the other side of the room. Cole is taken off guard and doesn't react in time to Wesker closing the distance and sweeping his legs out from under him. Before Cole even begins his fall, Wesker spins around, kicking Cole in the chest before putting him through another wall and back onto the streets. Cole again moves to blast Albert. Before he can, Albert is somewhere else. Cole is again momentarily surprised by this, as for a split second it looks like Albert just dodged his lightning, but then Cole realizes what is actually happening. Wesker wasn't dodging the blast, he just wasn't letting Cole aim at him long enough to actually shoot him. Realizing this, Cole changes tactics, using his electrokinesis to lift a car and throw it directly at Wesker, who scoffs and jumps over the vehicle, but Cole planned for that and fired a rocket which lands hitting the older man directly in the chest. Now with Wesker on the ground, Cole takes a moment to absorb some electricity from a nearby power line, and knowing Albert won't stay down for long, immediately starts his assault. Starting with the ice spikes, throwing dozens of sharpened spears at Wesker, who jumps and flips back to avoid being impaled. As he lands, he looks up to see Cole again throwing a car at his way, but not wanting a repeat of last time, moves to the side, only to see that Cole has used an ice pillar to jump up and is already aiming down at Wesker. Reacting more out of surprise than anything else, Wesker reaches for his lightning hawk and fires it. But again, Cole had planned for this and activates his shield. Rather than the bullets hitting him, Cole absorbs the kinetic energy and prepares to use it against Wesker. However, it's now that Wesker decides that he's toyed with his prey long enough and jumps up, grabbing Cole from the air and slamming him headfirst into the street below. Wesker then starts to savagely beat Cole before throwing him aside, and as Cole flies through the air, Wesker runs at him, catching up and hitting him again, before now running past Cole, only to stop dead in his tracks, and as he pulls his hand back and punches Cole as they meet, impaling him through the stomach. Cole coughs up blood and tries to push off, but Wesker grabs his shirt and keeps him in place. Now with victory all but secured, relaxed and grabs Cole's throat, forcing him to look at Wesker, forcing him to look him in the eye before triumphantly declaring, "This is nothing personal. You just aren't worthy of such a power." Cole wasn't paying attention, however, as he realized that Wesker had just put him in the perfect position to turn this around, and deciding to end the fight now, grabs both of Wesker's arms and pours all the electricity he can to into Wesker, who screams in agony as both of his arms are fried, with the skin turning to ash before the muscles start to melt. The spots where Cole is grabbed directly are even burnt down to the bone, leaving little but his blackened flesh left. Cole finally lets go, pushing Wesker back far enough to rip his hand from his stomach, and uppercuts him, sending him into the air before using his ionic powers, call down lightning crashing into Wesker the same way he had finished off Kessler. Now certain that the man was no longer a threat, Cole stumbles to a nearby generator, absorbing it just enough to heal from his injury. Limping back to the man, he's surprised when he hears the man still breathing. Even with his arms being all but gone and third-degree burns on his body, Wesker has somehow survived the encounter. Choosing to err on the side of caution, Cole uses his restraints to keep Wesker down before calling the police to come and take Wesker away, while he goes off to share some important information about the beast with his allies. And with that, I declare Cole MacGrath, the Saint of New Marais, the winner. This is another fight where the outcome honestly wasn't all that surprising. While I did have a moment where I wasn't sure, Cole's variety of powers and tactics in combat sealed the victory in his favor. While Wesker could theoretically take Cole down by speed blitzing him, Wesker is simply too arrogant to go for this method before Cole would adapt to his speed. And once Cole is prepared for Wesker's biggest advantage in this fight, it's already over. While true that Wesker's guns give him better range compared to Cole's amp, that argument only really holds any water if you ignore that almost all of Cole's powers are based around ranged combat, and are doing more damage to Wesker than Wesker's guns will be doing to Cole. Wesker is also far more capable as a hand-to-hand fighter, but Cole simply wouldn't let this fight stay at close range, having plenty of options for creating distance, many of which Wesker wouldn't be capable of countering or responding to. Overall, while Wesker's enhancements put him at the top of his own universe, when you compare him to other fictional universes, Wesker is all around not that impressive, with many fictional verses utterly destroying him, with most of the Marvel's street-level heroes being too much for him to deal with. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Do you agree that the Demon of Empire City would take down this maniacal god? Or do you think that Wesker would recognize Cole as a threat and take him down before he knew what was even happening? Let me know in the comments down below. If I got anything wrong, please feel free to correct me. Right. As always, I'm Ray932, and I will see you next time.
Fuck. Yeah. All right.
That's good. Just keep looking forward.
Look, I'm no threat to you, okay? I surrender.
Well, that's obvious. Seeing how you didn't shoot that guy. Okay, now don't do anything stupid. 'Cause I'm not as nice as you. I won't hesitate.
Tommy knows this area.
Oh, fuck!
Well, I'm sorry. I trust him better than I trust myself.
Stop with the bullshit. What are you so afraid of? That I'm gonna end up like Sam? I can't get infected. I can take care of myself.
How many close calls have we had?
Well, we seem to be doing all right so far.
And now you'll be doing even better with Tommy.
Not her, you know.
What?
Maria told me about Sarah.
Ellie?
And
You are treading on some mighty thin ice here.
I'm sorry about your daughter, Joel. But I have lost people too.
You have no idea what loss is.
Everyone I have cared for has either died or left me. Everyone fucking except for you. So don't tell me that I would be safer with someone else, because the truth is I would just be more scared.